All right, cool. So if anybody else joins in, we can just let them in. But yeah, so thank you guys for all coming. Really excited to present this webinar here to you. Today's topic is going to be on prospecting for social impact organizations. So just to start it off, wanted to kind of let you guys know that you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions along the way. This is an open forum. I know that some forums, it's generally just one person talking through the whole thing. I want to make sure that you guys are able to engage with me. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'll try to address them as they come. Otherwise, please feel free to unmute yourself when there's breaks in the presentation, and we can chat about it. All right. So first wanted to kind of start off by talking about the purpose of prospecting. Prospecting is generally thought of as a for-profit private organization machine used to drive sales, to do outreach for those organizations to bring in money. But oftentimes these social impact organizations, they require prospecting as well. And definitely, I've noticed that from a lot of my conversations with people from different social impact organizations, and welcome, Kuntimi, glad you could make it here. But yeah, a lot of times these social impact organizations, they don't really think of prospecting as a way for them to bring in business and increase their impact. So my purpose and what I'm trying to do through this webinar and through my work is to help companies improve their prospecting and outreach, so that way they can gain key stakeholders, key partnerships that help promote their brand, and ultimately bring others into their ventures to have a better and bigger impact. So the purpose of prospecting is to meet people, build connections, establish relationships, and ultimately do more business together and have a greater impact for a social impact organization. So to start this off, we need to identify prospects first. That's a part of the journey. That's what you need to start off in your prospecting outreach. So to do that, you need to first identify your target market. A lot of social impact organizations, it's more efficient to try and reach out to businesses, but there is also individual outreach that you could be doing as well. So from a business perspective, trying to identify the businesses that you want to reach out to, that's something that you need to do. So figuring out what your target business would be. Is it like a nonprofit another nonprofit organization? Is it a for-profit private organization? I've been doing some work with some consulting companies, and they work with private organizations specifically. So for their prospecting, they would be reaching out, trying to establish relationships with those organizations. And then for individuals, who would be your target individual market be? There's definitely a lot of individuals out there, so it's hard to identify specific individuals. But especially if you are reaching out to businesses, you want to be reaching out to individuals within those businesses to establish relationships with them, to try and establish a relationship with the entire business. If your target market is just individuals in general, maybe marketing is more your way to do outreach, and that's another whole other topic that kind of comes into this category. And then from there, we need to do what's called the Boolean search. So once you've identified your target market and you're trying to conduct your outreach, that's when you kind of need to go in and identify the right people that you should be reaching out to. So a Boolean search, some of us may know it very well through our education, probably did some for the term papers that we had to turn in, or the projects that we had to do. But it's a string of words that you type in that are key terms based on the market that you're trying to target, so that way you can find individuals to reach out to. Where do you use it? You can use it on Google, as you can see in the examples below. I use that. You could use it on LinkedIn. LinkedIn I use all the time for my prospecting, and it's a Boolean searches work very well in LinkedIn to find people that you're trying to reach out to. And how do you use it? You use it, as I was explaining before, just by typing that in. You look up the right people, you look up the right companies that you're trying to target, and then you kind of accumulate them into a list, which I will be talking about in a second here. And that's how you can kind of identify your outreach. So these examples below, these are examples of Boolean searches that I conducted when I was doing some work with Inner City Weightlifting, a nonprofit organization. So we were doing some work to try and build up an event that they were hosting, a free sponsored event. So I was trying to identify first companies that would be interested in attending, and then afterwards I was trying to identify the individuals. So here, this is the string that I used to identify the companies. What I was doing was I was typing in, I used like the Inner City Weightlifting name as an example, but I would type in like a name of another company in, let's say, the Kendall Square area of Boston, Massachusetts. And then I would type in philanthropy or philanthropic or community or social impact or diversity. That's just trying to find, like, for example, a company that, whether or not that company has any philanthropic values, if they have any community values, any social impact values. By doing that search, I would be able to find it on Google and say, okay, these people do have social impact values, so they're a good company to reach out to. You don't want to reach out to every company, because not all companies are good companies for you to reach out to. So that's a good way to kind of hone in on the right ones to reach out to. And then once you've identified that company, you can then go in, use that same company's name, and then type in the person that you would want to reach out to try and build that partnership. So for the instance of this company that the work that I was trying to do here, I was trying to reach out to do like partnerships, was reaching out for philanthropy, HR, human resources, and people, and doing like chief, director, or manager, because people who sit at those levels of companies are generally the ones that are going to be making the final decisions. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the Boolean search. Do you guys have any examples? I'm happy to kind of write out a quick sample Boolean search for anybody that is interested in doing something like this.
Ian, can you maybe do one for like for podcasts, for like social impact podcasts, maybe as it relates to like sustainability specifically, just to be an example?
Yeah, of course. So, of course, you want the podcast in there. Is it just podcast? Would you be doing like maybe a YouTube as well, or?
Yeah, YouTube could work. Live stream could work.
Webinar as well.
Webinar, yeah. And by the way, Ian, I've done this on LinkedIn Sales Navigator and Twitter before, but I've never like written it out the way you're doing. And I think that it doesn't seem that complicated, but it seems like it's good to know.
Yeah.
Very valuable.
Yeah. Because you then you can apply it to any platform. Definitely.
Yeah. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that the ORs are capitalized, for sure. Because that's how the algorithm makes it work. So we've got that. And then we do the and afterwards. The parentheses right here kind of groups that together. So it's choosing between those three terms. And then Grant wanted to do something in regards to sustainability, or maybe green energy, or let's do renewable energy, or farming, or green tech. We'll stop there. Is there anything else that you would be looking for specifically, Grant? Anything that you'd be looking for in a potential person to reach out to?
I I think that's a good encapsulation. I
Cool.
mean, that would be like, yeah, one search that we would definitely do.
Yeah, so this is great. Yeah, this is like a good example of something that you can type into a Google search and find companies that have podcast shows or live streams or YouTube shows, and they focus specifically within these areas that we talked about. And so from there, you could do that maybe even on LinkedIn, because people talk about this kind of stuff on LinkedIn and then they post about it. And these terms, they search through the LinkedIn pages to find like recent posts and whatnot about that. So this is a great method to try and identify those people. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If not, I can move on to the next one. And welcome to the people who just joined. Thank you for joining. All right, so next up on the list, you need to actually create a list. So you've done all these Boolean searches, you've identified a bunch of people, you've identified a bunch of companies. Now you need to have a centered place to hold all of that information and to track your outreach. So you need to build a prospecting list. So this is kind of a sample prospecting list. This is another one that I used for inner city weightlifting. So you want to include like the name of the individual you're reaching out to, the company name, contact information, and notes. Of course, depending on how you're conducting your outreach changes the type of contact information that you're putting in there. I usually like to put in an email or phone number or maybe both, or a LinkedIn URL to reach out to someone through LinkedIn. The company name is super important. I like to categorize specific lists by company name too. So you might have 3 or 4 people at a company that you're trying to reach out to. So by alphabetizing it and putting it by company name and then having each person under that company name right next to each other, so you kind of hit each company at the same time, is a good method. And then notes is one of the key points, the really, really important part. And it's definitely more difficult to do, to take notes on like a spreadsheet, for example. So once you kind of get to a point where you're starting to have really good conversation setting meetings, it might be smart to invest in a CRM tool to take more in-depth notes and have more space. But at least for the beginning of your prospecting venture, this is definitely usable and doable. But the notes, so you track what you did, if you talked to them, or even if you left a message or left a video message of some sort, and you put the date there as well. So for example, if I sent a video message on LinkedIn to somebody, let's say today on November the 2nd, I don't want to follow up with them again November 3rd, because that's kind of annoying. Nobody wants to talk to somebody who's continuously following up with them day after day after day. So you want to be able to kind of spread out your outreach as well. If you're not getting in touch with them the first time, kind of stagger it a little bit. Phone calls are a little bit different. Phone calls, you might be able to do a little bit more frequently and try to do it at different times to try and catch them at different times too. But like a video message, for example, that's a pretty substantial first point of contact with a person, and to follow up with them day after day is kind of obnoxious. Phone calls, people get phone calls all day long. So I feel like doing it like every couple of days isn't as harmful. Similar with the emails. So building a prospecting list is super important. Really need to do it to really track all of your progress that you're making. If you've been reaching out to a company for a super long time and aren't having any traction, that's where the notes will come into play, taking really detailed notes and keeping the dates in line, because that means that you most likely won't need to continue reaching out to them if they haven't really responded to any of your outreach in the first place. So we've got the prospect built. You kind of want to have a pretty in-depth prospecting document though. So right here, these are different tabs that I had on my prospecting list. So I had one separated for introductions. Those are the people that I haven't been able to talk to at all. Those are the people that I'm trying to introduce myself to, trying to reach out to have an initial conversation. Then I had a follow-up tab, somebody that I had already tried contacting before. Maybe I got them on the phone once. Maybe I sent them a video message and don't want to blow them up. So I'm going to put them on the follow-up tab. So that way I know to follow up with them on certain dates. On that follow-up tab, I'll have an actual column that's a date column. So that way I will know when to follow up with them next. And then I organize my list based on the dates. So that way the most recent date shows up first. And then the next tab I have is scheduled calls, which is somewhat self-explanatory. It's just where you have like your scheduled meetings, your scheduled conversations. You keep all your notes. It's the same type of headers that you had in the introductions. You just have all your notes in there, the name of the company, the name of the person, and you're able to track those scheduled calls. So that way, you know when to get on there and can take detailed notes afterwards. So as I say down here, organization is key. It's key to prospecting. You're not going to be able to prospect as efficiently and effectively if you're not as well organized with it. So keeping up with your prospecting list is super important. You need to make sure that you're updating it as frequently as possible, making sure that it's as organized as possible, because if it's not organized, it makes your job as conducting outreach much more difficult. So I have the goals of a prospecting list outlined here. So you want to track your outreach, as I mentioned, and then set reminders. So as I mentioned with the follow-up tab, you want to set reminders to follow up with people. Go through your follow-ups tab every day. I do that sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. I'll look through it and say, okay, I need to do these follow-up, and then actually go forward, do the follow-up, and then update the notes, and then update the date to the next time I need to follow up. And then, like I said before, keep good notes, because those notes will be able to help you. I like to keep really in-depth notes, which is super helpful. I like to talk about the actual conversation, what we talked about, all the professional side of what we talked about, but also try to get some personal information and record that down in the notes section as well. Because when you have the personal information, that helps you build the relationship, and it ultimately improves your prospecting. So does anybody have any questions about the prospecting list at this point? Go ahead, Grant.
I had a question about like, for me, sometimes it seems a little overwhelming because like I'm not the most organized person. And obviously this is like kind of time intensive. I think a lot of us have we've maybe done a ton of prospecting in the past, but maybe haven't called it that, or maybe haven't had a really defined strategy. So my question is with all the people that you've talked to in the past, we've all had a ton of business conversations and conversations with friends and things of that nature. How would you recommend maybe getting up to speed with all those, over the past year, all those conversations you've had, or something like that? Do you recommend going backwards, or is this a process that you should just start now and just try to stay steady with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as it pertains to the past stuff, I like to pull up old emails, anything that I had, maybe notes that I took down, trying to make sure that I go through it and update it as much as possible. It is definitely difficult to pull up all the information from your past business conversations. I mean, especially in our world when we're having so many of these conversations, you all just kind of lose everything. But if you have some form of documentation of it, it's definitely important to go back and update it as much as possible. Otherwise, you kind of just starting fresh and getting yourself going. I was dealing with I was using the Google Excel document for a very long time, doing my outreach over these past few months. And It wasn't until last month that I invested in a CRM tool. So my notes from before were not very in-depth. They didn't really have a whole lot of content in regards to the conversations that I was having. So in a sense, it kind of set me back a bit when I was converting over to the CRM tool. But now that I have the CRM tool, I have much more in-depth notes, and it's been very beneficial. So to your point, I kind of had to start from scratch in a certain way. I did have some documentation that I got to keep down, and I took as much down as possible, but you also don't want to waste too much time trying to find that documentation when you could just continue having more conversations too. You know what I mean? Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? That was a good question, Grant. Thank you. Cool. So this part is about the outreach, the actual outreach itself. It's fun. That's probably the most fun part of it. I mean, you're doing all that Boolean search, and then you're filling out the Excel document. That can all be really tedious. So this part can be fun. I like to use a few different outreach methods. My favorite is LinkedIn. I've been using LinkedIn a bunch. It's a great way to build professional relationships with people. When I'm using LinkedIn and I find someone that well, first off, I actually, to find people in LinkedIn, I either A, do the Boolean search, or B, just search like a hashtag. So recently I've been doing hashtag social impact or hashtag social entrepreneur. And I'll find posts recently, and then find a person within those recent posts that kind of aligns with my values. I'll send them a connection request, and I'll include a note on that connection request. People get connection requests all the time, and it's nice to have that note in it too. Kind of gives the person a bit more of a understanding for why you're trying to contact them in the first place and connect with them. And it seems a little less intrusive than just getting a random connection request from some random person you don't know. And then from there, I like to do video messaging, because a lot of people, when they conduct outreach on LinkedIn, they generally do text-based messaging on LinkedIn, and everybody gets those, and it can be really boring. So I do the video messaging. It really diversifies my outreach method, and really has been resonating very well with people, which is exciting. I generally keep the video messages to around 1 minute in length. Spend the first 20 to 30 seconds introducing myself and talk, kind of bridging some form of personal connection, whether it's like a location that they live in, if you have a personal connection to there, or some work that they did in the past, just some form of personal connection. And then the last 30 seconds, you talk about what you're actually trying to reach out about. You can also use email as an outreach method. There's definitely a lot of different ways that you can do with email. I've done emails in the past, actually working with my friend Grant here, Grant and Mitch. They have their company Authentic, and I was doing some email marketing for them. And emails are definitely interesting. I mean, everybody's inboxes get flooded day in and day out, so it's hard to stand out. You want to have a really engaging subject line, as well as an engaging first line of your actual body of the email. So that way you're engaging with the person, they see it, they're interested, they continue reading your email. And you want the email to be a little unique, want it to be fun, want it to kind of bring interest towards why you're trying to reach out. I've used videos in my email in the past too. Vidyard is a wonderful tool to use when you're doing like email outreach or even LinkedIn outreach, for example. So if you have like a demo of a product or a service that you provide, Vidyard allows you to share your screen and present at the same time. So it's a great tool to utilize, and you can integrate it into your email. You can integrate it into your LinkedIn message. And it's definitely a unique way to reach out to people. And then the third way, and it's definitely not the easiest way, but it's the most used way, is the cold call. That's if you get the person's phone number. I've gone in my prospecting outreach. I've done like you search a company's phone number and then you call into the operator and then try to get connected with that person. But the pitch is a little bit different with the cold call than the other two, because you've actually got the person live and you're trying to kind of keep them engaged on the phone. But as you may expect, nobody really likes getting a cold call from a salesman. So trying to get through that those initial setbacks in the conversation can be a bit difficult, but definitely fun at the same time. I was working a job before where I've made up to like 500 phone calls in a day, and it was the most tedious thing ever. So I definitely prefer the LinkedIn video messaging over cold call. I think it's more effective, but it also depends on what you're trying to do and who you're trying to reach out to. And then after, you want to create a pitch. So first part of your pitch, the pitch itself is actually what you're going to say to try and bring them into your mission, trying to bring the person into what you're trying to do, and get them engaged. So the first part is going to be your introduction, and the second part is going to be your call to action. So the introduction should be pretty simple, straightforward. For example, I'll give mine real quick just to kind of show you what mine would be like. I just say something along the lines of, "Hi, my name is Ian. I'm with Global Grassroots Consulting." And it's pretty basic. You want it to be quick, easy, efficient. And then the call to action here is really where you try to throw the hook. You try to get someone latched into your goal, your mission, and try to get them engaged and interested to learn more. So I use the bear and the honeybee, or the honeybee hive here, because I think it's funny that the bear wants to go get the honey, of course, but the bear is going to get stung when he's getting the honey. And if he's doing it right, he's going to get the honey. It's going to be sweet. It's going to be rewarding. If he does it wrong, the bears are just going to swarm him and he's just going to run away. So the goal is to do it in the manner in which you're not going to get stung as much as possible, but you're going to try and come out with some rewards in the end. So the call to action could be as simple as check out my website. It could be, if you're on the phone with someone, you'll want to ask a question like, is this something you're interested in learning more about? Or is this something that you oversee? My last job, I was working at a company where I was calling into organizations, asking them if they were people that oversaw the implementation of projects and utilized consultants for projects, because that's what I was selling. I was selling consulting services. So I would ask them, is this something that you would ever utilize? It's a quick question, kind of gets them to, you want it to be a yes or no question, because if they say no, then the conversation's over. If they say yes, well, the conversation's not necessarily over. You might want to dig in more, because some people just say no to get you off. But if they say yes, then you've got someone who's engaged and you try to talk to them a little bit longer. So yeah, try to be a clever bear, and get there in a clever way that's not obnoxious. No bear should go up there and just knock it over. It's going to get swarmed. You got to go about it tactfully. You got to go about it smartly, but you also don't want to do it where it's taking you too long to get to it, because the bees are going to find you and they're going to sting. So goals of prospecting outreach. You want to build relationships with people. As I mentioned, it's really important to establish those personal connections, because nobody buys from someone that they don't like. Nobody invests in a product or service or even a person who they don't like. Social impact organizations, it's pretty standard that, and then this is where I think the sell is the easiest, is that what social impact organizations are doing is some amazing work trying to better society. And you got to be kind of heartless if you're not interested in learning more about what they're doing. And so I think it's a lot easier to kind of build relationships, and also the next one, increase interest in regards to your services and the products that you provide, because you're providing some amazing work to try and better society. And so it's really important that you at least convey your message and try to get people interested and build those relationships. And so, yeah, the second part of the goals of prospecting is increasing interest. So you want to get the person that you're reaching out to interested in what you're trying to sell, or interested in what you're doing through your company. And it gets them engaged. And regardless of whether or not they are interested in pursuing a business relationship after that first point of contact, it's the important part is that you established something with that person. Patience is super important when it comes to prospecting. And I think that a lot of people struggle with that. I know that I have struggled with it in the past, and to a certain degree still do. Patience is really important, because at the end of the day, nobody's going to want to buy your product, invest in your service right after one call, one conversation. So that leads into the next goal, which is scheduling meetings. You want to, after your initial point of contact, try and schedule a meeting. In my video messaging, that's my call to action. I introduce myself, and then afterwards I try to schedule a meeting. Regardless of whether or not there's business to be had, I think that scheduling the meeting is the great way to establish those relations and increase interest as well. So those are, if you do all three of those, you're definitely golden. And I think the last, and definitely not least, part of the prospecting the prospecting outreach is to just have fun. A lot of people get really afraid of, and I understand it completely. It's a scary thing to do, to reach out to people who you don't know, reach out to people who you've never talked to, and try to sell them on what you're trying to provide. It can be definitely daunting. So don't go about it in this like salesy manner. Go about it in this manner in which you're trying to just establish connections with people. And if it leads to something more, that's amazing. If not, then so be it. But if you're having fun in your outreach and your prospecting, then people can read your energy, and will ultimately have more fun with you, and it'll build that relations. And it's definitely a fun process. Even with like the prospecting, building the prospecting list, and even with the Boolean search, I still try to have fun with it. I crank some tunes and try to have some fun while I'm building that list, because even though it can be tedious, it can be fun at the same time. So those are my suggestions. Does anybody have any questions on conducting outreach? Some of the methods that I talked about, getting through that pitch, or the first initial setbacks that somebody might present you with. Does anybody have any questions on that? How about you, Misha?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on a couple of things that you said that I think were really important. You know, it's a lot of the time people, like, you know, they do the outreach, they call, nothing happens, and then they give up. And you know, sometimes that's justified and sometimes it's not justified. But as you said, it's all about relationship building. It's all about like kind of cultivating a relationship. That cultivation can take months. And one thing that we've kind of come to realize ourselves is, you know, just kind of, we get the meeting, we make our pitch, people are like, this is cool, we'll get back to you. They don't get back to us, or whatever it is. But if you just kind of rely on this kind of person-to-person contact, then it scales out of control for you. Like, you just can't maintain, you know, 100 conversations as an organization.
Yeah.
And, you know, so what we're doing is, you know, we're and I'm sure that this is like not rocket science for anybody here on this call, but it was new for us that, you know, every time you talk to somebody, like you put them on your mailing list. And, you know, if you want to be, you know, upfront about it, you can ask them, like, I'd like to put you on our mailing list. It goes out once a month, like something like that. Generally, people always say yes. Or, I mean, I've kind of come to realize that accepted practices, you just wind up on the mailing list. Like, just because you've talked to somebody, like you're on their mailing list. And the advantage of that is that scales for you, you know, because then you have like, you know, 500 people on your mailing list,
Yeah.
and you don't have to necessarily be talking with all those 500 people all the time, but you're reminding them that you're still out there, that you still exist, that you're still making progress, that you're still engaged with whatever it is. And then they'll say, oh yeah, you know, I met this other guy, you know, the other night, and I think it would be a good person for you to talk to. Like, that's something that will trigger for them, you know, once they've gotten your you know, your newsletter or whatever it is that you send out.
Definitely.
And
Yeah.
and if you're just staying with, if your outreach just ends with outreach, then, you know, you're never going to be able to kind of scale your presence is really my point.
Most definitely. Yeah. You definitely can't end your outreach with just outreach, because you're not going to build those relationships. The follow-up is super important. And to your point about like the mailing list, I think that's why, and this might be another topic of conversation that I might lead, is the relationship between sales and marketing, I think is super important. Because if you've got a strong marketing campaign and you're conducting outreach at the same time, then the people you're reaching out to ultimately see your marketing, and they're continuously engaged with your content, whether you know it or not. So I think that's super important as well. But no, that was a great point, Misha. Thank you for bringing that up. Contemi, I see you've got a raised hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, yes, real quick question. I feel like maybe, I think maybe you've touched on it a little bit, but I feel like when you have an organization, a nonprofit organization that is trying to reach out to companies to get donations, for example, then the discussion is kind of a little bit different. Or I would argue that it's a little bit more difficult, because, you know, as a nonprofit organization, you can't necessarily say we have something to offer. Obviously, there is the whole, you know, corporate social responsibility issue, and, you know, obviously there is also the danger of greenwashing. I mean, that's in our case, because we are an organization that focuses on sustainability. So I feel like it is difficult, because we can say, okay, we're going to offer you this, you know, if you kind of like are interested, just in the exchange. And so so when you try to not to give up, and it becomes like you're kind of disturbing in a sense, you know, because we've tried cold calls, we've tried emails, and most of the time, you know, we need to be lucky enough, you know, to have someone to pick up the phone and say, okay, I want to listen. I just want to listen to what you guys are about, to what you guys are working on, and yeah, so I think for us personally in our organization, that is a real challenge. I don't know how you deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I think that regardless of what type of organization you are, you're going to have complications and issues when you're conducting outreach. It's definitely an awkward conversation to ask people to just invest in your nonprofit organization and provide funds for your nonprofit organization. So that's why the relationship development portion is super key. You don't want to go into the conversation just trying to sell them on your company and on your nonprofit. You kind of want to talk about it. You want to approach the conversation from a standpoint of trying to learn more about their values, their company's values, and what they do. Because when you do that, you understand maybe they're not a good fit for funding your company. Maybe they don't have the same values that you do. And that's okay. It's just not the right company for you. But the point of the outreach is identifying potential partners, potential people that might be a good fit for you. Once you've kind of had that surface level, okay, this is something we're interested in learning more about, then you actually go forward and schedule the meeting and have a more in-depth discussion where you'll discuss like exactly what your company does. You'll discuss what their company is interested in doing and whether or not there is room for a potential partnership. I don't think approaching the initial conversation from a perspective of please give to our company is a smart idea. I think you want to go about it from a perspective of let's build a relationship between your company and my company, but let's first see if there's a relationship to be had in the first place. Because I think especially with nonprofits, I think the biggest part is that nonprofits need for-profit private companies just as much as for-profit private companies need nonprofits nowadays. We're seeing a transition where there's a higher level of care in regards to social issues from the for-profit industry. So it's at this point, consumers are pretty much searching for that type of background in their companies that they're buying from and the companies that they're working with and the companies that they're using. So if they don't, a lot of these companies nowadays do want to work with like nonprofits and other social impact organizations. It's just a matter of seeing if those values align between your company and their company, and then kind of talking to them in like a scheduled follow-up conversation about how they can best help you, just as much as how can you best help them.
Just to move again in the same direction.
Yeah.
Because generally what we do is we conduct a lot of research. Yeah. And we have a list of, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 companies which we feel like they might be interested in what we do. They have like you go to the website, go to the kind of projects they work on, go to the kind of partnerships they have. What are the nonprofit or the social projects which they have supported in the past or funded in the past. And so that is kind of like our criteria for them to come into this list. And then we have the list. And when we go into the call with the companies, we kind of like already know a lot about the company,
yep.
And we kind of like, we feel like we can actually work together. But that is like, that is the way we operate normally. But if I'm, focusing on what you just said, entering the discussion with a different mindset, it is most likely going to be time consuming. If you have like the 40 to 50 companies and you want to, take your time and learn more about them, even though you might have done some research already, then it's going to be quite time consuming.
Yeah.
So how is there like a balance? Like, how do you kind of like, what is the meaningful trade-off between investing so much time into the, into the different companies and having some form of significant output?
Most definitely. So on my end, I prefer to go into those conversations almost blind. I don't like going into a conversation having done extensive research on one specific company. I think you're doing yourself a disservice if you're spending too much time researching a company, because then you go into the conversation thinking you already know everything about the company. When at the end of the day, everything about that company is most likely not online. It's mostly not accessible. So going into those conversations blind also helps you in approaching your conversation. So that way you can learn more about them and learn about it from them. You don't want to learn about it from their website, because some companies' websites are outdated. Some companies' websites don't have everything that they need on there. So it's best to actually, for lack of a better way of putting it, to hear it from the horse's mouth, to actually hear it from the person and learn from them what they're doing. So I suggest kind of cutting down much of your research time and spending more of your time actually conducting the outreach. When you're doing the outreach and you're having those conversations and you're trying to understand where they're coming from, try to direct the conversation more from a perspective of like what social impact values they value. Because if they don't value the same values that you value, then there's no point in furthering the conversation. We're wasting time. It's not worth it. But if they do have very similar aligning values and it seems to you that there's potential for collaboration, then that's the way to, then that's when you would have more scheduled meetings and have more discussions and try to go about that conversation and build a relationship with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
I want to thank you for that last statement about doing less research and more outreach, because I'm a community outreach manager for organ donation and transplantation organization. And what I like to do is grassroots outreach, right? Like,
Great.
and I have a meeting at 1:30 with a councilman, and I literally was on the website looking up everything about this man. And when you said that, I stopped. I was like,
Sweet.
yeah, I'm like, why? You're right. Like, why am I doing this? So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
You just saved me so much research for future meetings that I have. And yeah, that was a light bulb.
Sweet.
Yeah, but I feel like it's kind of like intuition in a sense. You know, you would say, or for me personally, I would think if I'm gonna meet up with someone, like the smallest form of courtesy, respect is kind of like have an idea of what the person is doing. Like, yeah, I don't know everything about you, but I kind of know. I took some of my time and did a little research, and so I know a little bit about what you do. Just I don't know. But
I think it's smart.
Definitely.
I think it's smart if you have like a scheduled meeting, for example, to do a little bit of research. But if you're sending an initial message, keep it very surface level initial research. I mean, when I do my LinkedIn messaging, I go through their LinkedIn. I find, like I said earlier, I find something that I have in common with them, and then I mention that in my message to them. But I keep it at that. I don't go to their website. I don't go to their Facebook. I don't go to their Instagram. I don't look at all their different tools to try and build this ideal like research like that I've gathered on these people to try and build my understanding about them. Because no matter how much research you do, there's a limited amount of information on that person, on that organization. So you're digging yourself a hole by doing all of that research, because you're setting yourself up to have this understanding that what this person and this company is about, when that not necessarily is not true, and you're only getting one side of it through your research. I do think that that's super important, and I think that you can approach conversations as, oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. Can you explain more? I think that that's a super important and useful question to have when you're talking to someone. Oh, I saw something a little bit about that on your LinkedIn page or on your website, but I'm interested to learn more. Can you speak to them? Can you speak to that point? Because it engages them. They talk to you more, and it provides you with more information to then have a follow-up question for the next time, like to come up with something else to say, or try to pitch yourself in another way,
I feel like this is, I don't know if anyone has been in the online dating scene here in the past like year or two, but it was like if you were on a dating app like Hinge or like Bumble and you're trying to meet someone and you match with them and you're about to go on a date, and then you spend 2 hours going on their LinkedIn as well as their Instagram, as well as their Facebook. And then you show up to the coffee date and you're like, hey, so I see you have like 3 siblings. And they're like, how do you know that? Whereas, although I do think that like, if you're going to have some information about them from their Hinge profile or Bumble profile, maybe they'll say, they have a picture of hiking. Great. You can mention, so like you're interested in hiking or something like that. Right. But like, I feel like there's a level of research that shows that you care that makes for an interesting conversation. But then you can take it too far and get psyched out. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know. That just made me think of online dating. And I feel like there's a lot of applications for prospecting and online dating that you can learn together. And
then it's like, imagine it's just kind of information overload too. It's like you gather all this information on the research, and then you have a conversation, and it's like, well, your website said one thing, and then you've got all this other stuff too. Like, what the heck are you who are you actually? I mean, like I said, what you find online only shows one specific side, one specific value of that company, of that person. You want to get the whole understanding based on the conversations. It's like trying to figure out, like texting, for example, similar to what Grant was talking about with the online dating, but with texting, like you can't understand someone fully through text. It's impossible. Have you tried having an argument over text? It just doesn't work. You can't read the tone of voice. You can't understand how passionate they are about that topic or anything like that. So just have the conversation. Don't do too much research, because you're going to psych yourself out, and you're going to waste time doing some unimportant research.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add to that is that you're trying to get to somebody within the company, right? But you may not have the right person. And I think, Ian, your point about like we really don't know very much about companies is really, really true. Every time I've gone to work for a company in some other industry or whatever, I'm always like off by an order of magnitude of how many employees that company actually has. Companies are way bigger than you think they are.
Yeah.
They make way more money, and they're way more complex than anything that you can find on their website or their filings or anything like that. So you have to kind of be sensitive during the conversation of, are you even really talking to the right person?
Yeah.
And one piece of advice that we got fairly early on was end every conversation with, who else should I be talking to? And because you want to open, like it's about cultivating relationships, but it's also about opening doors. Right. It's about, like, well, okay, we established this connection, with your company. It looks like your values are our values, and et cetera, et cetera. But then, there's still a chance for the conversation to just die, mm-hmm. because you're not talking to the right person. And you're not asking that person, are you the right person that I should be talking to, or should I be talking to somebody else in your company? And they might, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that people are always looking to simplify their lives. Like, just because they've taken a conversation with you, that doesn't mean that they want to keep on talking with you, have a second or third conversation. Like, okay, I kind of did my duty and talk to this person, and now I don't have to do that again. But the thing is that, if this will be especially true if they're not the right person for you to be speaking with. So you have to kind of make that effort to ask, like, is there someone else within your organization or outside your organization? Like, do you know anybody else, that we should be talking to in terms of our mission and our values and stuff like that? And then, you're inviting their expertise into the conversation, as opposed to like that you're just asking. And I think that that's kind of the really delicate balance that you have to kind of strike with people, is that, that you're not like constantly asking for stuff, but you're asking them to participate in, your own organization's mission and journey, and that you value their expertise, and that it's okay if they're not the right person for you to be speaking with. But, now that we're talking, like, who else is there that we should be speaking with? Yeah,
definitely. Referrals are the best way to go about it. I mean, I went through the whole spiel in the beginning about conducting like Boolean searches and building a prospecting list. But at the end of the day, like all your research, you might end up turning over a bunch of stones that you find out are not fruitful. Whereas if you get a referral, you're getting information about someone that, like, you're getting information from someone about another person who might be interested, which there's more value in that than just doing a bunch of random outreach to try and uncover stones. So definitely a very good point, Misha. And that's something that I struggle with too. I mean, at the end of the day, like, all of this information, it's a lot. There's a lot to a prospecting outreach. And there's so many different tactics that you need to kind of focus on to improve. But I think the most important part is just getting started. As the same is with a lot of other things, it's just do it. Because if you focus on all the different tactics that you have to focus on, and all the different things that you need to do, you're going to get bogged down and feel under pressure. But just get in and do it. You're going to mess up. I've messed up plenty of times. I've been hung up on plenty of times. I've been told to F off plenty of times. Like you're going to get some rude people. You're going to get some really terrible calls, but you never know when you're going to have that next amazing call that brings forward your next amazing relationship. So I think that's the important part. And then if there's no other questions, so I will be sharing all of this with you, but I have further resources that you guys can kind of check out to kind of help you along with the process. So I do a lot of video creation. Shout out to Grant and Mitch for their inspiration on the videos. I have a YouTube channel, and then I post very regularly on LinkedIn. So if you want to look at those, there's a lot of good information in regards to conducting outreach, marketing, and social impact organizations. And I also have a blog on my website. Of course, you can't access the links here, but as I mentioned, I'll send this out in a follow-up email afterwards. So you guys feel free to check those out and provide you with some more information. And then, yeah, my website is down below here, globalgrassrootsconsulting.com. If you guys have any other inquiries you're trying to learn more about my company, you can always check that out. But if there's no other questions, I know we're at the time limit here, and I want to respect other people's time. I appreciate everyone coming on here. Really appreciate you all supporting me. This is my first webinar, and I feel like it was a success, so I'm really excited. But I can stick around here for a few more minutes. So if anybody wants to stick around and chat a little bit more, I'm happy to do that. But thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Right.
Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Ian.
Nice to meet everyone.
Take care, you guys.
We're still got a squad here.